Thanks, Mr. Dolan. Senator Fawcett.
Mr. Noel, when there is an aircraft accident and there's a fatality and the coroner becomes involved, could you describe the relationship between ATSB and the coroner?
The legislation, the Transport Safety Investigation Act, requires us to cooperate with coronial processes, and therefore coroners have if you like, a special relationship with us. There's a range of information and support that we're required to give to coroners that we don't give to other legal processes. We try as far as possible to ensure that our reports are reliable and comprehensive and therefore can be used by coroners to form their views, which are largely no blame and in parallel with what we're trying to establish. We recognise that there are areas where coroners will investigate and we don't, and we're trying to deal with that carefully. We do that mostly by making sure we're in close contact with the police who are working with the coroner so that there's clarity from the beginning as to whether we're going to be playing to any significant extent. And we're always happy to explain our reports to coronial processes. In addition, we've been offering accident fundamentals training, so the basics of how we approach our job, to a range of police officers across the jurisdictions who are likely to be assisting coroners in carrying out their duties.
Do coroners ever face a situation where they have to choose between your advice and that of another aviation expert?
Quite often, Senator. It used to be more common than I think I've noticed in the last year or two, that alternative views were put to coroners.
Who would those other stakeholders be?
Our experience has been that counsel assisting in trying to do a comprehensive job in support of a coroner sought other lines of information and brought it to bear in the process. And other parties, all of whom have their own interests in a coronial process, often feel it necessary to test a range of alternative hypotheses. Sometimes the weight comes down to a different place than we placed it, and that's just part of the relationship. If there's a coronial finding that is inconsistent with what we found, or more information comes to light in the course of an inquest that's relevant to our investigation, we'll reopen the investigation and make sure that's properly weighed up in our processes.
I notice CASA is often another player in the coronial inquests, and often you'll highlight something, the coroner will accept it, and basically tick off in his report on the basis that a new CASA or something is going to be implemented. Do you follow those up? And I noticed, for example, just looking through a few crash investigations, and I'll just pick one, the Bell 407 that crashed in October 03, CASA Part 132, in fact 133, was supposed to be reworked around night vision requirements, night VFR requirements for EMS operations, and I noticed that still isn't available now, nearly 10 years after the event. Does that cause you any concern that recommendations that were accepted by the coroner, put out as a way of preventing a future accident, still haven't actually eventuated? And how do you track those? How do we as a society make sure we prevent the accidents occurring again?
We monitor the various coronial reports and findings that are relevant to our business, Senator. We don't have any role in ensuring that coronial findings or recommendations are carried out by whichever the relevant party may be, and I think that would be stepping beyond our brief.
Who should have that role then?
I would see that as a role for the coronial services of the various states. But to add to that, because we're aware of the sorts of findings, and as you say, it's not that common that there's something that's significantly different or unexpected for us, but when there is, we will have regard to that obviously in our future investigation activities, and recognise there may already be a finding out there that's relevant to one of our future investigations.
Would it be appropriate to have a sunset clause, is not quite the right word, but a due date, that if an action is recommended and accepted by a regulatory body, in this case CASA, that the coroner should actually be putting a date on that CASA must implement by a certain date or report back, whether it's to the minister or to the court or to the coroner, why that action hasn't actually occurred.
I think I would limit myself to the comment, Senator, that that's the way we try and do it. We've got a requirement that in 90 days, if we've made a recommendation, there's a response to it, and we will track our recommendation until we're satisfied it's complete or until we have concluded that there is no likelihood that the action is going to be taken.
So, Mr Mrdak, as Secretary of the relevant department, how would you propose to engage with the coroners to make sure that we, as a nation, close this loop to make our air environment safer?
Well, I think as Mr Dolan's indicated, the relationship with coroners is on much better footing than it has been ever before. I think the work of the ATSB has led that. I think it becomes then addressing the relationship between the safety regulators and the security regulators as necessary with the coroners. I think it's probably one I'd take on notice, Senator, and give a bit of thought to, if you don't mind.
Okay, you don't accept that your department and you as the Secretary have a duty of care and an oversight to make sure that two agencies who work for you do actually complement their activities for the outcome that benefits the aviation community?
We certainly do ensure that agencies are working together, and that's certainly occurring. You've asked for the more detailed question about coroners and relationships, the agencies. I'll have a bit of a think about that, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Fawcett.